I can hold my breath for a long time.
Hello, and welcome to Comic Book Bears Presents The Bear Cave of Terror. I'm your hairy, heavy homo and horror fan host, Steve Morey. Each week, here in the Bear Cave, I invite a horror-loving guest who brings with them one of their favorite scary movies. It can be classic, gory, trashy, obscure, well-known, or something probably still banned in Britain. In other words, a thrilling work of cinematic terror that we think you might enjoy. In each episode, we'll dig into the flesh and bone of the film, highlighting our favorite scary moments, as well as stories and details from beyond the screen. All while our guest imparts their deep and possibly concerning love for this week's frightful vision unto you, our dear listener. And with me in the Bear Cave again is Mr. Ken Creamer. Ken, welcome back.
Hey, great to be here. Great to be here. Super excited about this one.
Oh, definitely. And you know that if Ken's here, then we're going to be talking about something that's related to Stephen King. And this one definitely is. And what movie is the one that we're talking about?
We are talking about the classic, the one, the only, the collaboration between the greatest mind, Stephen King, and the greatest director, George A. Romero, Creepshow from 1982.
Creepshow. And this, by the way, you know, for anybody who doesn't know, this is also one of my favorite horror movies. I have loved this since I was a kid. When I first caught it on TV, I just fell in love with it. So it also has a comic book connection to me, just the way that it's created and presented, but definitely one of my favorites, longtime favorites. So I'm glad we're talking about it.
It's great taste.
And so this one, we're going to do it a little bit differently because this is an anthology film. And it's the first one that we've been talking about on this podcast. Instead of doing like one plot summary for the whole movie and then bouncing around from topic to topic, we're going to go in order of the stories that are presented. Because I think, you know, in this case, with this anthology film, it's almost like watching 5 different short films. There's some connective tissue. There's also the bookend intertitle, you know, story that kind of runs throughout the whole movie. But really, I mean, we're like watching 5, maybe 6 different movies all in one. And so it kind of makes sense to just kind of like look at them one at a time and then, you know, pick them apart. So, Ken, what is the sort of like the basic premise of this, or the basic concept of Creepshow?
So this is what I love about this movie is it's kind of different from other anthologies. Is the basis of it is that it's a comic book, and the little vignettes that you watch in the movie are all different stories from inside this comic book. And of course, when you have a comic book, you have to have an audience for that. So that's where our movie starts. It starts with a young boy reading a trashy comic book that his father does not approve of. And then it goes kind of from there into our stories.
Oh, that father really lays into the kid. Now, the father is played by Tom Atkins, who he's a lot of fun. You've probably seen him in other horror movies. You know, I just recently talked about him in the context of Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. He was the protagonist in that film. But here he's kind of less likable.
Yeah. And then the son is, interestingly enough, actually played by Stephen King's real life son, Joe, which is also now he's an author in his own right, and he writes under the name Joe Hill.
And, you know, it was funny, but after all the years of like watching this again and again, I didn't make that connection that Joe King, as he's known in the credits, is actually related to Stephen King. I was just sort of like, oh, King, that's interesting.
Well, if it doesn't make you feel too bad, I've been a Stephen King fan for years, and I just figured that out like a few years ago. So I didn't know that until fairly recently too. So, but it's pretty cool.
Well, it's funny too, because I probably, you know, you don't really recognize him without the beard. Because, like, Joe Hill is famously almost always bearded, but without it, he looks exactly like his dad, which is kind of funny. And now watching it back, knowing that the Joe King that you see, the kid, is Stephen King's kid, you're like, oh, I know that nose, those eyebrows. Absolutely, he's his son.
And he did, let's be honest, he did okay acting as a child actor, but there's one line he delivers when the dad's taking away the comic book where he's like, "No, Daddy, please don't. I'll be good." And you're just like, "Oh, that's a line delivery right there."
Tom Atkins, of course, being big jerky dad who's like, how dare you read this filth? Eva Jean Saraceni is the actress who plays Billy's mom. She's the one who's like, let the kid have his comic. He enjoys it. So she ends up being the sympathetic one here, while Tom Atkins is just the worst. But after he throws it away, the kid's lying in bed and he's just sort of like, really unhappy. And who shall come tapping at the window but the Spectre, aka the Creep, aka the sort of crypt keeper character from the comic book itself.
So I have this poster in my office. It's this blacklight poster, and I love it so much. The only issue I have with it is they actually refer to him as the Crypt Keeper, and I'm like, that's not the Crypt Keeper. But other than that, it's a cool Creepshow poster. But yes, I like the Creep.
Absolutely. And, the cool thing about the Creep is that Tom Savini and, his team designed and built this whole thing, this animatronic puppet creature that literally only makes maybe total 10 seconds, maybe less in the film, before they change him over to animation. So he was kind of disappointed. He was like, oh, we put in all this work and we made this thing look really cool, but then they covered it up with a cloak and then turned it into a cartoon. So, well, it happens.
I can understand his disappointment.
Yeah. But it's pretty cool, and it exactly pulls back to the old EC comics where you have some kind of creature or character who introduces the stories. This Creep is kind of silent. He doesn't say anything, unlike the old historical EC comics where they were very talkative and filled with dad jokes and puns, and made it possible to kind of laugh at the horrible things that were being presented in the comics. But even still, sometimes the horrible things that were happening in the comics were kind of funny too, in a twisty way.
Humor.
So, yeah. But it's a good sort of device to get you into the stories, to explain why you're seeing multiple stories in this film. It's like, oh, they're all stories from this comic. And so that leads us to the first story, which is called Happy Father's Day. And Ken, what can you tell us about this one?
Well, I definitely know in this one, when I was a child watching this one, this was probably one of the ones that scared me the most because it involves family drama and zombies. I mean, you can't go wrong with that. So the whole concept is it's every year this rich waspy family comes together to celebrate, their wealth and on Father's Day. And Aunt Bedelia always shows up at 6 o'clock on the dot and goes out to the grave of her father, who apparently everyone knows she killed by slapping him with an ashtray, which, interesting fact, that ashtray makes an appearance in every single story in Creepshow. If you watch it for it, and it's like a game of Where's Waldo? It's Where's Ashtray? So I love playing that game. But so basically she's at the grave complaining. The family's inside talking about the story of how she killed her father and how rich and great they are. And then, the poop hits the fan, so to speak, and Daddy claws his way out of the grave and he wants his cake and you can't keep him away from it.
And, the thing is, nobody in this particular story is likable. Nobody's a good person. They're all bad in some way, shape, or form. So Nathan Grantham, who's the walking corpse, made all his money being a bootlegger, murder for hire, mafia type shenanigans. And, everybody else in the family just is kind of, they're stuck up. They know they've basically made their wealth through blood money, but they don't care. And then, of course, Aunt Bedelia herself, who is played by an amazing actress, Vivica Lindfors, who again is one of those things where it's like, how did they get these sort of like these prestigious like stage and like long storied actors to appear in this movie? Apparently she loved it. She thought it was great. And she actually is well acquainted with Carrie Nye, who played Sylvia, who's her niece in this, who's also like the other sort of snooty person. But like apparently the two of them were like, yeah, this is actually a lot of fun. It's great doing this. And Carrie herself grew up reading EC comics. So she was like, I get to finally be in a movie that's just like when I was a kid reading these comics. It's
Dream come
kooky, it's
true.
scary, morality tales. They're so much fun. But I mean, Bedelia, and I do have to say, Aunt Bedelia maybe is the most sympathetic in a way because she, you know, like she's his caretaker for so long and he was this horrible man, just abusive verbally, and ended up like also murdering her fiance or having him killed.
She was in love and killed him.
Yeah, you know, because he didn't want to lose her taking care of him or something. And so eventually she just snaps and, you know, clocks him with that reappearing ashtray that's all over the place in this movie. But yeah, so she basically pours one out for him at the grave and he comes steaming out from the grave, which basically kind of implies that he dragged himself back from hell because like he's still smoking, and murders her off camera.
And the thing is, it's not a regular zombie either. It's not like he just goes on a murder rampage. He's got magical powers because when they're at the gravestone and the nephew who Ed Harris, of course,
Ed Harris.
Ed Harris, I still can't freaking believe that, comes out to the grave and I always thought he was behind the tombstone pushing the tombstone. It wasn't until I actually watched it this last time that I realized he was at the foot of the grave holding his hand out, like using power to pull the tombstone onto him. And so, I mean, it's not just a zombie. He's a magical zombie.
He is going to torture his descendants and make them pay for, I guess, just him dying and him being a horrible person and them enjoying his wealth after he's gone. But yeah, I mean, he has a pretty sizable body count in this. Like he kills Aunt Bedelia, he kills his daughter, he kills Ed Harris, who's the husband of the youngest niece, like the grandniece. The two of them have a very interesting scene. They put on some modern music.
Modern for the time.
Modern for the time. I don't know. I guess
maybe not even then.
Donna Summer-esque, maybe. So I guess the implication is they're like disco dancing. But in terms of crazy movie dancing, this is kind of up there with Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Just what are they doing? Specifically Ed Harris. What is he doing? I guess it was like 12 years before Pulp Fiction, and this is where John Travolta kind of got some, inspiration, maybe.
Possibly. Let's just say it's not going to win Dancing with the Stars anytime soon.
No, not at all. But so he gets crushed, and then the cook ends up getting killed. We don't really see how. She just kind of her body is there when Aunt Sylvia goes looking to see what's taking so long for the dinner. And then of course Sylvia gets her head lopped off, and it's just the niece and nephew are the only ones left, the brother and sister. What do they find? Nathan Grantham.
Cake.
He got his cake. Basically, Carrie Nye, just her head covered with candles.
And that just ties right into one of the things that I think was so cool about this movie is the way they do the transition. It starts like a comic book scene, it goes into live action, and then it ends in a comic book type scene and goes back to animated style. And I'm like, I just love those whereas they're like, and if you actually read the bubble on the niece, it actually just says gag. She's like, gag,
choke, yeah. And it's pretty cool. So kind of like where I've got the red light here, they do that on screen, and it's just they take the characters sort of with a close up, and the background becomes just this psychedelic, bright red primary color with like maybe like a swirl or some splash or something behind them to really kind of hammer home, like, this is a comic. We're going to do these crazy reactions, and we're just going to take you, the viewer, out of it to just understand, like, you're watching panels in a comic. And it's cool when they have those transitions. They'll even sometimes do borders to create a look of a panel in some of the other scenes, which is really neat. I thought that was just really a great idea, and something that really ties it back to like the inspiration, which is the EC Comics.
For its time, it was just a very clever way of doing that. So
Yeah,
I just thought that was worth mentioning.
definitely good, and they do that in pretty much in each sequence, in each story. There's a moment where at least one of the characters kind of has that very comic booky realization, or like this is the shock. It's like, oh my god, but it's pretty cool. So yeah, so that takes us then to the next story, which is probably the most Stephen King-y of the Stephen King-y stories.
Yes, because this is one of only two that were actually already written as a Stephen King story prior to the movie, and then the other ones were written specifically for the movie. And this one it's interesting. It's the Lonesome Death of Jody Verrill, but it's also known as Weeds. It was originally published in '76 in Cavalier Magazine, men's magazine, and didn't actually get republished until 2020 when a special edition of Night Shift was released that had it in there. So you couldn't get it really in print unless you happen to get that particular magazine or that particular copy of Night Shift. But you can find it under Weeds or The Lonesome Death of Jody Verrill. And I really enjoyed this one as well because, of course, it stars my favorite person, Stephen King. And the really kind of cool thing I like about this one is it's Stephen King, as well as there's only one other actor in the entire thing. The same actor plays the father, the doctor. All of it is played by the same actor. So it's really just two people in this entire thing. It's more of a conceptual kind of horror. Almost, I don't know if this would be considered like a cosmic horror, like a Lovecraft kind of thing.
In a way, I would kind of chalk it up to that. Like, it's cosmic horror, but also kind of like environmental horror, a little bit of body horror, really, to be honest.
Body horror.
It kind of mushes that all together. And, the other character, or the other actor who plays the other characters in this one, is Bingo O'Malley. And one of the things that he commented about when they interviewed him for the documentary Just Desserts was when he went to see the premiere with his family. He brought his family. Nobody reacted when he was on screen of his family members because they didn't recognize him.
That's funny.
Because apparently he always had a beard, but like in the movie, without all the makeup, like he's clean shaven as the father who appears in a mirror, but as like the doctor and the college professor at the meteor studies department, he's got crazy facial hair and big thing going on and all sorts of stuff to make him almost unrecognizable each time. So if you didn't know that it was the same person, you may miss it.
Recognize
that it's actually the same actor, as his family did when they watched the premiere, and he had to like nudge him and say, "That's me. Look, that's me. All three of them are me."
And of course, it's a total Romero thing because he is known as like one of the greatest actors in the Pittsburgh area, and Romero loves setting all of his stuff in Pittsburgh. So that's kind of cool. Romero's bringing in his people. But the whole concept of it, I love it. It's this meteor lands in this hillbilly's backyard or front yard. And he decides he wants to sell it to the Department of Meteors up there at the university. First thing he does is he touches it, which was not a good idea. And then he pours some water on it, causing it to crack open. And then, I love the like kind of dream sequences that they do in it. It's like you've got the main storyline, and then he keeps having his own little side fantasies, which is, where you see the other actor in all those clips. Yeah, I just kind of loved how, he was such a dumbass character, but you kind of felt so bad for him by the end of it. It's like, here's this guy who's had nothing but bad luck literally his entire life, and this is what happens to him. And then it just turns out that from the meteor starts growing plants, lots of plants, and they start just spreading and growing everywhere, which is kind of where the cosmic horror comes in, because it's just going to spread over the entire world. It's the mist, only it's the green.
Very true. And also, it's only 5 miles from Derry, so that
Castle Rock was there as well.
Castle Rock, like they're all there. Like all the signposts that you see where there's all these weeds growing up on top of telephone poles and through the cracks in the street. And poor Geordie, of course, ends up just basically becoming a giant moss monster by the end, where he takes his life. So a sad end for this one. But Stephen King, I love how he acts in this, because basically he acts like a cartoon character. He's just so over the top and wild and crazy. And apparently George Romero had asked him to play it like the Roadrunner, like be as over the top cartoony as you can. That's what I want. That's what I want to see.
And it works.
Yeah, well, I think he did it.
It's not so much like a horror, like, boom in your face. This one's like, oh, I feel so bad. It's a body horror. I feel so bad watching this guy go through, because it's on his fingers, then his tongue, and then he's like, no, not there, not there. And as soon as he jumps in that tub, that's where his fate was sealed, because if he didn't do that, he might have lasted a little long.
But you had mentioned filming in around Pittsburgh. For this movie, they actually built their own studios. It's just outside of Pittsburgh. They found what used to be an old high school, and they converted it into sound stages as well as offices. So they had like everything right there. So they could basically produce this whole movie, with all the sets. They could build everything that they needed in-house, place for the trailers filled with cockroaches. We'll get to them. Basically, it was all done there. And so the gentleman who actually built all of the sets, Cletus Anderson. Love that name. Love the fact that, they relied on a guy named Cletus to go in and do all this work for them.
Get her done.
Go on, Cletus, you can do it. But speaking about this particular story, he went and built the farmhouse, the garage, like the whole area. He built that outside in the grounds that they had. There was a small hobby airport not too far away, and it threw off pilots because they were flying over what they knew to be vacant farmland. And here's now a farmhouse with like a whole thing and a tractor and a car and a garage that looked like they've been there for years. And so, apparently caused a lot of random havoc. Nothing terrible, nothing serious, but like confused a lot of people. And then, of course, when they were done filming, they knocked the whole thing down, stripped it away, and it was like they were never there.
Very cool.
So I bet a whole bunch of pilots kind of thought they were hallucinating for several months.
That's how stories of like the Mandela effect. I remember there used to be a farmhouse there. No, there isn't.
There ain't no monorail, and there never was. But yeah, this was one of those things where that whole farmhouse, everything, the exterior, they built just for
cool.
this.
They just don't do that nowadays. They use CGI for it, and it just isn't the same.
And I mean, they could have done matte painting for all of this as well. And I think they did have some like composition shots where there was a matte painting, but the actual house, the exterior of the house and the garage and everything, those were all built for this, which is pretty cool. But that, of course, then brings us to the next story. And that one is probably I think for me it's one of my favorite stories in this, just because it's got a really great cast of 3 people, and it's just so much fun. And also terrifying in a way.
I just love a good story of revenge, and that's exactly what this is.
So this one is called Something to Tide You Over. So right off with the puns right away.
Love it.
So what happens in this one?
So basically in this one, we have a rich, super rich guy who is married, and his wife is cheating on him. Ted Danson is playing the person who the wife is cheating with. And Leslie Nielsen is playing the rich man who does not like sharing his toys, so to speak, and decides to confront him and basically forces him to come out to watch a video and showing his wife buried up to her neck in the sand in the beach. And then he forces him to go out to the beach and get into a hole, and he sets up a camera to film him for the tide coming in. And then he goes back to his house and just chills. And then later that night, he gets a couple of visitors that are a little soggy and squishy, and they seek their revenge. And he winds up in a hole on a beach, screaming that he can hold his breath for a really long time.
Oh, yeah. And this was it's a great story. Like, I mean, it's a great, simple revenge tale, but the way that it's presented with the actors that are there. Leslie Nielsen, legendary. And here he's playing a villain. And it's not the first time he's played a villain before. He's done bad guys, but he started his career as kind of like the sexy dude. And don't get me wrong, he is. but he also became a lot more famous for his comedic roles. And here he gets to kind of smush them together a little bit, where he's kind of a little bit nefarious. He's like a little extra sinister, but also extra, I'm such an awesome dude. By the way, you're going to die. It'll be horrible, but you can hold your breath and you might survive. Like
one of my favorite lines from this particular one is when he's like at his Ted Danson's house and he's like, "Hey, your cables back here are loose. You better tighten those up. I'm surprised you haven't noticed the lack of your picture quality." And it's just like he's such a douche about his electronics and wanting to get like the best picture quality about it. And it's like, of all the things that are going on right now, that's what you have to be worried about.
and like in the same breath, he's also like, and I might be killing my wife for betraying me. So you better come along so you can, whatever, I don't understand what Ted Danson thought was going to happen there, but he definitely did not expect this. And we'll talk about who plays the wife, because you don't really get to see her too much, at least not without a lot of makeup on. But Ted Danson here was not the big star. Leslie Nielsen was the big star in this particular sequence. Ted Danson had just been in a couple movies. He was most known then for Body Heat, which had just come out, I think, the year before, where he was the dancing lawyer. But this is before Cheers. So he's just kind of like, a sexy newcomer to Hollywood. But this was like a fun role for him. And he was pretty happy to do it. And it was funny because after this is when Cheers hit it big. So he became Ted Danson. But before that, he was just like the dancing lawyer guy from that one movie. And then who played Rebecca or Becky, the wife, was actually Galen Ross. And if you have watched other Romero movies, was also in one of my favorites, Dawn of the Dead, as Fran. She was the main character, Fran. So it was kind of cool seeing her here. But you see her mostly, and Ted Danson, of course, afterwards, in their zombie form. Which is wild looking. I mean, it's blue, lumpy, covered in seaweed, and I mean, their eyes are closed shut because they're so bloated with water. But the stories behind the scenes on it, because it took several hours for them to get into the makeup. They covered in toilet paper and silicone and whatnot. But apparently they used to run lines, the two of them, as if they were in an episode of Hee Haw. And basically had Tom Savini and his makeup crew there rolling the entire time, just, hysterical the entire time they were doing their makeup. And just... they would have little antics too between shots, and there are some outtakes that are available to see that are really funny, but apparently they thought it was hilarious. And Leslie Nielsen too, of course, had everybody in stitches because he's Leslie Nielsen. And he apparently had a fart machine on him at almost all times.
You could do that. That would be funny.
But I mean, this is just really fun. But the idea of being buried up to your neck in sand and watching as the tide comes in, that to me was kind of a terrifying concept. Like, this is not a really scary sequence. It's kind of funny. It's kind of over the top and wild because Leslie Nielsen is, of course, over the top and wild. But just the fact that they're like stuck there in the sand and the tide's coming in and it's going to wash over them and they won't be able to get out or get away.
That's what I liked about it. And it's not like your typical, back from the dead zombie, we're going to rip you apart kind of movie. They literally take him out to the beach and bury him up to his neck and do the same thing to him. And I like that it's like, they're more calculated about their revenge.
They set up the camera and you can tell they set it up because it's got seaweed on it. That's a really fun one. And that's another place where you see the ashtray very prominently on his bed nightstand.
And I was going to say, because I'd mentioned it to you earlier, I hadn't been able to confirm it, but it is on Wikipedia. But supposedly, in one of the scenes, Richard Gere has an uncredited role as the news anchor in the broadcast. So Leslie Nielsen, when he's in his beach house before he gets attacked by the zombies, and he's got the TV on in the background, the newsman talking is supposed to be Richard Gere. So I thought that was just kind of cool.
That is neat. Like this movie, and all the actors basically have talked about this. Working with George Romero is like working on like a family business. Like everybody knows everybody else and they all have a great time. That's why people continue to want to work with George Romero and with his production crew. Like they all just were like, hey, we're having a great time. This is so much fun to do. And all the actors basically had the same thing to say. Like they loved it.
It seems like this would be a fun movie to work on.
Oh, yeah. And it wasn't the biggest budget either. I know the kind of like the backstory, what brought George Romero and Stephen King together to make this movie was because it was going to be a smaller budget, proof that as a team, they could work well together because they really wanted to do a film version of The Stand.
Yep.
And,
They even worked on a script together.
Yeah, they worked on a script together, because I think they met in like 78 to start work on that, and then realized, whoa, this is going to be way too big. Nobody's going to want to take a risk on something that could be this expensive. But let's do something else that might be fun. And so they were like, well, what if we did an anthology movie kind of based on those Tales from the Crypt Vault of Horror comics? And then Stephen King just like churned out the script in 60 days and was like, here you go, perfect.
Well, and then considering out of the 5 stories, he had 2 of them, so
yeah, you only had to write 3, really.
that's nothing for him. He probably had those on a back shelf somewhere. I'm convinced that he's got literally like a box of books somewhere ready to be published. So when he dies, he'll literally have a new book coming out like every year for the next decade after he's passed.
Oh, I'm sure. But yeah, so after Something That Tied You Over came the next one. And this one was also something that King had published previously, and that's The Crate.
Yep, it was originally published in Gallery magazine, another men's magazine, in 1979. This one is my all-time favorite of all of these stories. This is the one that I just love the main character, the main monster, I should say. But the concept is basically a crate is found under a stairway in a university, and the janitor calls a professor to come help him. Well, it turns out there's something living in the crate. So then the professor is having a breakdown after watching this poor janitor basically get turned into mincemeat. So he calls his buddy, who's another professor there, who happens to be married to the great Adrienne Barbeau, although just call her Billy in this, because everyone does. So Billy is a bit of I don't know what would be a polite way of saying she's a bitch.
Yes. That's the most polite thing to say,
Billy's
really,
a
about
bitch.
her.
So yeah, so you see all these scenes with Billy and how she interacts with people, and boy, just like how much people hate her and why. But her husband is this like meek, sweet guy. And so the professor calls his buddy to come help him. And then the meek guy's like, hey, yeah, I have an idea. I could use this to my advantage and maybe solve 2 problems at once and get rid of my bitch of a wife, and then feed this thing and get rid of it. And then problem solved. And they proceed to do so. And that's basically the concept of the crate, is this creature found in Antarctica and winds up eating a few people in modern day university.
The husband, the put upon husband, is played by Hal Holbrook. So, great actor himself. And of course, the other professor, the one who kind of is traumatized by the whole situation, is played by Fritz Weaver, who horror fans definitely remember from The Reanimator. But here he's kind of, he spends most of the time in shock. He goes to help the janitor to open up this crate, and when they do, this horrific looking sort of creature pops out. Well, first he kind of like basically gnaws on the janitor's arm, gets it stuck in there, and then he just pulls the whole janitor in and just like Tasmanian devil just devours him.
I mean, he was hungry. He'd been in there for quite a while, poor thing.
But yeah, he's kind of peckish. And then, of course, unfortunately, a grad student comes by, also potentially like trying to help the professor. By this point, the little creature, nicknamed Fluffy, by the way, by the production, Tom Savini had done the concept art on this one and built it, actually with the advice of Rob Bottin, who other, massive special effects guy, famous for designing The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing. But he got some advice on how to make this creature, and he kind of says that it's a mix between sort of the Tasmanian devil and a chimpanzee of some sort. To me, he kind of looks like an evil Ewok version of Harry from Harry and the Hendersons.
I can totally see that. That is Harry, a white-furred Harry from Harry and the Hendersons with claws.
Lots of teeth, too. Tons and tons of teeth. And it is a terrifying creature. Like, it's a really horrific-looking creature. And this has the most blood out of all the segments. It's just everywhere. But I find it really wild that Hal Holbrook's character is like, this is how I'm going to get rid of my wife. No one will ever suspect that she's been fed to a 100-year-old demon monkey creature.
And you just see the wheel turning in his head. He's like, and he was so nice and meek up to that point. And he's like, yeah, this could be the solution to my problems. Drugs his friend, knocks him out, gets him out of the way.
His character isn't exactly 100% nice either. I mean, yes, he's got a reason. His wife is terrible, but he has lots of fantasies, kind of like like the Jodie character in the meteor segment. He has a tendency to just kind of imagine things, horrible things happening to Billy, his wife Wilma, like shooting her directly in the head.
So I'd probably be doing that too.
Constantly imagining horrible things. It's funny that this one is one that he had published previously, because out of all these, this feels to me like the plot feels to me like the most Stephen King like essence out of all the 5 stories, because he does have a lot of characters that do this, that have a very rich internal life, that have a lot of fantasies and find themselves in these extraordinary circumstances. And Hal Holbrook's character, instead of sort of taking a more heroic route, is like, oh, I finally have the chance to like off this bitch.
I'm going to take it and run with it while I can. Yeah. He's not a hero, but he's sympathetic still.
No, when he's kind of blackmailing his friend, saying like, yeah, you can't say anything about it because we'll both go down.
Yeah, I won't say anything. You won't say anything. Yeah.
Yeah, let's just play some chess.
So now, kind of random fact to just kind of cement the Stephen King universe. There's actually a Creepshow TV series as well that is currently on Shudder. And I don't know what episode it is, but in one of the episodes, they actually make reference to a crate being found at the bottom of a quarry. In like a newscast in the background, you hear a newscaster make a comment about a crate was found in a quarry, which of course is where the crate in this story winds up at the end. He locks it all up and pushes it into the quarry. I just thought that was kind of neat.
I wonder if they do too much. I haven't seen, I think, more than one episode of the TV series, but there's 3 or 4 seasons of it, plus there's a couple specials. And of course there's the ongoing comic series, which is still coming out.
They actually just came out with one. John got it for me. It is Super Creepshow is what it is. And it's superhero-based horror stories. So I'm like, that's kind of cool. I haven't read it yet. It's on my pile, but
I think that's one of those things that I think is really cool about this film, is that it took its inspiration from those horror comics and then ended up actually becoming a horror comic in the end. So it just kind of came full circle. But there actually was a comic book adaptation of this movie that was drawn by Bernie Wrightson of Swamp Thing fame, and just a great classic illustrator from DC Comics and other things. He actually did the artwork for the adaptation, not the artwork that is in the movie.
I'm pretty sure Bernie Wrightson also did the drawing for Cycle of the Werewolf by King. Pretty sure he did that for that as well.
But yeah, I think one of the things that they had talked about when the film came out was if there were copies of the comic book itself that's presented in the film, and like, no, it was done just for this movie. It was actually, I think, animated and drawn by people who work for an ad agency that was in the same office building that George Romero's ad agency was, and they used to work together. So he was like, hey, you want to draw like an animation for a horror movie I'm making? And they were like, sure, why not?
That's one way of doing it.
Yeah, it's who you know, really. But yeah, so the crate then makes way for the next, which is pretty much like the last full story, and that one is called They're Creeping Up on You.
Now, this one to me and that's kind of another reason I like Creepshows. Each story is horror in a slightly different genre, kind of like Jodie Verrill was cosmic. Then you had just monster horror with the crate, things like that, psychological horror with being buried in the sand. This one is more of a gross out kind of horror. Basically, it's the idea of this hypochondriac millionaire businessman living in his penthouse, and he is so hydrated. Everything is white. He's wearing white. He's got gloves that he wears. He won't touch a button until he disinfects the button. Yeah, he's a jerk. He's just an ass. It's like his building manager's on vacation. He's like, well, he'll call me back, or he'll be looking for a new job on Monday. And the whole thing is his apartment is now infested with roaches, and roaches start making an appearance. And at first it's one, and then two, and then it's 1,000 of them, and it's horrifying and terrifying. And then the lights go out and it gets worse. And yeah, let's just say by the end of it, the roaches have their way with him and get their revenge for everyone he's done wrong. Yeah, because he's not a kind person. He's not a person you feel sorry for. Part of the storyline that's going on is they're taking over, I think, another company, and one of the executives has killed themselves, and his wife is calling, and he makes the line, and this is actually probably one of the funniest lines. He's like, can I ask who gave you my number so I can fire them? And she's like, I got it from my husband's Rolodex. And he's like, well, I can't fire him because the guy's already dead. So it's like, geez, what an ass. And then, yeah, he gets what he deserves. But yeah, this one, it's such a gross out that, yeah, I love it. It's just kind of like makes you feel like things are crawling on you or in you. Ugh.
This one is probably the most disgusting because unlike what they would do today, they use live roaches. They use real cockroaches of all different species, all different sizes. I think that's what kind of makes it extra terrifying and extra gross, because you know those are real. Like it's not a CGI thing. It's not a, they're filming it in like this weird hermetically sealed space that's just that they built. No, this is an actual set. It is open on the top.
Dummy.
There are people all over the place, that are filming, and they're releasing thousands of cockroaches at a time. So I didn't know this about Tom Savini, but apparently he suffers from katsaritophobia, which is fear of cockroaches.
Oh, this would have been really hard for him.
But yeah, so he, as much as he could, spend as much time away from them, designing the big set piece. So E.G. Marshall, who plays Upton, the main sort of horrific character that you see, he basically is the only person in this. There is the building super, or I guess the night super.
All you see of him is like his eye and his mouth.
But yeah, you only see like partial of his face most of the time, and it's always exaggerated. David Early plays that. The character's name is White, but it's really just him and voices on a telephone. And man, what happens to him at the end is pretty disgusting, because the lights go down. He's put himself in his little hermetically sealed room, his bedroom. He like flips off the covers of the bed, and it's just nothing but roaches. And the lights go out. And when they come back, it's just him lying there, and no roaches to be seen, until they start pushing out of his chest. They pop through his chest, pop out of his mouth, of his face, everything. There's blood everywhere. They're tracking blood all over him. That was a practical effects dummy. They had created the dummy, hollowed out the chest, and they put a hole in the top of the chest and like covered it over with toilet paper and did makeup on the toilet paper. So it looked like skin. And then they just started pushing those roaches through. Oh, so disgusting, so horrible. And then what was left over is like, you just see, it's like this glass door, and you just see basically this a foot and a half deep just of roaches.
So
horrific.
Gross. Made me not want to eat cornflakes forever.
Ugh.
And I asked John, I'm like, okay, who puts cornflakes in a food processor and then eats it? Like,
yeah, nasty. Because they used real roaches, they had to get them from somewhere. They got them from Trinidad. They had actually, Rubenstein, who produced, called up, I think, the Natural History Museum or something, and they connected him to entomologists who were like, sure, we'll help you out. So they went down to Trinidad. They came back with 8,000 different roaches, and then they set them up in the studio. Like the studio lot, they had different trailers. They had one whole trailer just for roaches. And it was just vats of roaches that they were breeding throughout the filming. They were working on other stories and doing some other things. And so eventually they had, I don't know, maybe 20,000. It's some ridiculous number altogether. They weren't supposed to release them. Essentially, they were supposed to exterminate them all after they were done with them, because they weren't like, protected species or anything like that. But man, ooh, they got everywhere. Because every time that they would release them for a scene, they would end up just like crawling out, going somewhere else in the soundstage.
You can't wrangle a roach.
No, months later, they were dismantling things, and like roaches would come out of the walls. They would find them everywhere, and they're like, yeah, somewhere in Western PA, there's like Caribbean roaches breeding like crazy out there because they weren't able to find them all. Ugh, it's terrible, but it looks good. It makes for good horror.
It does its job.
Oh man, but yeah, so that's like the last main vignette, the last main story. But we do have a nice wrap up or conclusion to the opening father-son argument about the comic book. And what happens here?
So we didn't discuss there's a break in the middle where there's a couple of garbage men and they find the comic book and they're flipping through it. One of them is Tom Savini, which I thought that was cool that he has that role. And they're like, oh, there's a coupon. You can order a voodoo doll. Oh, somebody already sent away for it. We can't use that one. Then we cut to the end of the movie and you have the father downstairs and the wife's ironing. And the father's like, oh, my neck. Oh, it just hurts. I must have slept on it wrong. And then it cuts to the kid upstairs, stabbing the pin into the voodoo doll. And then the dad's downstairs, oh. And the kid's just, yeah, getting his revenge for stealing his comic book. And it's just the perfect way of just coming full circle.
It really, like, it's so much fun. And they do, technique wise, even though all 5 of these 6 stories are so different, they all have the same techniques. We were talking about the panels, but also sort of like that victim close up with like the big red or whatever going on behind them that just picks them up and pulls them out and just, really shows you, hey, this is all part of the story. This is just a comic book. They do that for all of them, including the final one, because Tom Atkins has that moment where he's like, big red light behind him. This was so cleverly reduced. It's fantastic. And it ended up making, like, it was number 1 the week of its release in 1982. It was the number 1 movie for the week. Which is this is pretty great for a horror movie, especially a lower budget, anthology horror movie of a completely new property.
Definitely, it's a holiday, and the holiday being Halloween, classic.
Yeah, it helps that it has like 2 of the main names in horror from like the past 50 years attached to it, Stephen King and George Romero. So
you kind of mentioned it when you talked about how they had worked on a script for The Stand together. So this is kind of a brief what if could have happened. At one point in time, George Romero wanted to do Pet Sematary. He also wanted to do a version of Salem's Lot. He also was working on a version of It, which later went on to become the It miniseries that was on TV that he didn't have anything to do with. And then he worked with King on the Dark Half movie.
Which did get made.
Which didn't get made. But there was a lot of potential there for movies that didn't get made that I would have really liked to have seen them get made.
Yeah, can you imagine? I know both It and The Stand ended up going the miniseries route, and they are classics. Those are classic miniseries, unforgettable. But man, could you imagine like a George Romero produced It or George Romero produced The Stand? I don't know if I could sit through 4 hours of
that might be a bit much.
In a theater, because there's so much there. And if they had to cut out a lot to make it palatable for audiences in the 80s.
This kind of led up to and into Tales from the Dark Side, which was a George Romero series. And there were several Stephen King stories adapted for Tales from the Dark Side series, as well as then there was Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, which, in my opinion, there's Creepshow, Creepshow 2, and then it's Tales from the Dark Side. Those are the actual, because Tales from the Dark Side is the spiritual successor to Creepshow. There is a Creepshow 3 movie, but I do not recommend it.
I think it went straight to DVD or something.
Yeah,
video.
It's not good. Nothing to do with Romero, nothing to do with King. It was just a play on the name, not good. But the Tales from the Dark Side movie also has the story The Cat from Hell, which was written by Stephen King in it. So, there's a really great relationship between King and Romero that I just love how all their work, they do so well together.
Yeah, I think this collaboration is just a wonderful example of what happens when you have 2 peak contributors to like the horror genre, whether the words or the film, put them together and they can create magic and they create a classic. like this. And yes, I mean, there's some kind of sensibility about it that's very early 80s, but at the same time, it's also kind of timeless because it references so much to those 1950s comics, which themselves were also kind of timeless. Like those stories, you could take them and you could show them again to a modern audience, and there is that understanding of like the horror aspect, but also kind of the quirky tongue-in-cheek humor, and it just works. It works
It's
really
a great
well.
anthology. I just love it. The transitions, all of it just works so well together.
Yeah. It's a real comic book movie based on something that was not a comic book.
Now there are comic books. How meta is that?
Yeah. But again, I love it. I'm so happy that you brought this to talk about because I think it's just a great example of horror for fans, people who haven't seen it before. Like, this is one to watch. And if you have seen it before, watch it again.
Well, look for the ashtray.
Look for the ashtray. Try and find the ashtray in each one. I think I've only seen it in 2, maybe 3 stories, but I got to keep looking for it. I'm sure it's there somewhere.
It's like an Easter egg. You'll find it.
You've just listened to another episode of the Bear Cave of Terror. And if you haven't seen Creepshow, or after listening to us are struck with an irresistible compulsion to watch it again, it is streaming free on AMC Plus if you're a subscriber, but otherwise it is still available digitally and on physical media pretty much anywhere. And Ken, if listeners would like to get in touch, how would they do that?
I am on 60 Seconds of Steven on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Blue Sky, YouTube, everything but X.
And that's 60 spelled out SIXTY. And you can also follow us at the Bear Cave of Terror on Blue Sky and Instagram at Bear Cave of Terror, all one word, or send an email to bearcaveofterror@gmail.com. And as always, a list of sources will be available in the show notes if you'd like to learn more about the original Creepshow. I've got some articles in there from Fangoria, if you can find those back issues, or go to their archives to read those issues in digital form. And of course, there is the documentary Just Desserts, which I highly recommend if you can find. But in any case, thank you for joining us. And remember, don't lick the meteor shit. Goodbye, everybody.
Meteor ship.